During that tour, we went up north, and Steve Jones joined us on stage for a few nights, I think, because the Pistols were off the road or something. I remember it chiefly because I think we were arrested in Bradford. I think we had Suicide with us from New York. And because we were carousing at the motel, the police were called, and I think it was actually Suicide who got dragged out of their beds and down the police station, and not anyone else, which was a bit of bad luck because they were nice guys. They didn't deserve that. In fact, Vega was one of the bravest men I've ever seen on stage, because no one in England had ever seen anything like Suicide. And the skinheads just weren't standing for it. I've seen a man jump up and smash him in the face while he was singing. I've seen a bottle miss his head, and he bent down and picked it up and threw it at his own head, as if to say, "You idiots, how about that?" You know. He was brilliant. He faced them off. And Richard Hell and the Voidoids were on that tour as well. And it was a time of saliva and gobbing, and it was disgusting. By the time we came on, they'd all run out of gob, but Richard Hell took the full, fresh load of it. It was just beyond belief. People wouldn't believe it today. Well, politically at that time, with Thatcher in Britain and Reagan in the White House, it wasn't looking too great for the left. And we were always of the left. But having said that, we didn't have any solution to the world's problems. I mean, we were trying to grope in a socialist way towards some future where the world might be less of a miserable place than it is. But if Karl Marx was unable to do it, there's no way that 4 guitarists from London could do it. So we were like groping in the dark. I mean, we had a sort of direction, but I don't know where it would have led. You have to think to yourself, what would you do if you did rule the world? It's a tough question, and I don't think we'd had an answer to it. Not that we should have done, but we did try to put our minds and pose those sort of questions. Whatever good use that was, we did try. We did try to think and talk with each other about what we were doing, or what songs meant, or what we should do, or what we shouldn't do. We never let it lie. We weren't a lazy group just riding along for the hell of it. We tried to think about our audience at all times. In 1974, there didn't seem to be any colour in life. There were rows and rows of buildings, all abandoned, bought up by the council and just left to rot. For what reason, I don't know. There were hordes of people in London who couldn't afford to pay rent, not the rents that were being asked. So the only thing to do was to kick in these abandoned buildings and then live in them. And thank God that happened, because if that hadn't happened, I would have never been able to get a group together, because we were in a situation where we were absolutely penniless. I mean, if we hadn't had the squats, A, for a place to live, and B, we could set up a rock and roll group and practice in them. I mean, we started the One-on-Oneers with 1 amplifier and like 1 speaker, and like we built our equipment. I built my equipment from a drawer. Like, we got some drawers out of a skip, and we used to buy cheap speakers down the Edgware Road, and like we just drop them into these drawers and put a facing board on them and turn them up, and that would be the cabinet. We practically built. I used to go to gigs with 2 bricks in a shoulder bag, and these bricks were to sit in an upturned record, the deck of a record player, upturned with a broom handle screwed in it, which was the mic stand, and the mic was taped on the top, and the bricks were there to drop into the record player to keep the thing steady so the mic didn't fall over. I mean, we built our equipment, and like that's how we made it and we booked our own club. We didn't no one was going to book us into a pub. Can you imagine what we looked like? A bunch of crazed squatters. I mean, we found a pub with a room upstairs, and we rented it for a quid for the evening, and that's how we learned to play, by doing it for ourselves, which is like a punk ethos. I mean, you've got to be able to go out there and do it for yourself, because no one's going to give it to you. And like we clawed our, we were living in no one would have lived where we lived. It was an abandoned bomb site. I had a guy come in. He was an expert at connecting us to the company head. I'll never forget this. He came in, this guy, with like overalls on and a welder's mask and huge gauntlets. And he just advanced up the basement corridor, and he thrust this power cable into the company head. Like, he reconnected the house into the national grid. And I'll never forget, the shower of sparks was like 20-foot long blue sparks, like flew down the corridor and like blew him backwards. But he jammed the bloody leads into the company head, and then we could plug in and start playing. And it was that kind of a situation we were dealing with, Just a little anecdote about how to get equipment when you don't have any. I had a job cleaning the toilets in the English National Opera just before the Clash started. And I noticed there was a microphone at the very top, high above the stage, and I'm talking like 200 feet above the stage, for the man in the top gantry to talk down to, say, the spot operators or someone down inside wings. And one day when no one was around, I climbed this ladder all the way up to the top, very top above the stage at the English National Opera, and I had a pair of wire cutters in my overalls, and I got hold of the mic, and I cut the lead, and I stuffed the mic down my trousers, and then I climbed all the way back down to the stage, and then I went underneath the stage to like stash it somewhere in the back, and I was kind of sweating and with the excitement of, will I get caught? Because you couldn't really see in an opera house who's watching you and who's not. And as I walked through the back corridor, the manager of the opera was coming towards me, and I thought, he's sure to notice this microphone stuck in my trousers, but he just went, all right, and passed me by. And that was one of the mics we used at the beginning of the Clash. A spliff bunker was something that I realized was a great thing, because you can't have a load of idiots partying in the control room, because the engineer can't hear and no decisions can be made. And so I was keen to hang with people, because otherwise you're in an isolated bubble, but it has to be done carefully, because you cannot have people pouring wine into the mixing desk or behavior like that. It's just not going to happen. And so I invented the spliff bunker, which was like a place where you could like smoke weed and hang out and talk out in the main body of the studio, as far removed geographically as possible from the control room, so that in the control room sanity could reign and people could EQ things and get things recorded correctly. And the spliff bunker was a place where you could come up with your next, while they're fiddling with the last thing, the spliff bunker was where we'd come up with the next thing we were gonna, and as soon as they got a rough mix down, we'd be like, fresh tape on the reel, let's get the mics out, because we're gonna go like this and this and this, and we'd just keep doing that day and night. And that's why it had to be a triple album. The first time I ever heard the word punk used to describe anything that anyone was doing was in Time Out, a London listings magazine, where they said, and Eddie and the Hot Rods in the second generation of punk bands. I remember reading this caption and going, what is this punk? What is this word? And then the Pistols came through, and it was clear what that meant. Well, in our terms, it has a different meaning. In America, a punk meant a kind of useless hood or someone who gets fucked up the arse. Well, we can't use that, but that was the original meaning of punk, was something quite different. But in Britain, anyway, punk began to mean this kind of music played very fast. From 1965, when we had the luxury of pirate radio in Britain, because before there was no rock radio or pop radio before that time. And from 1965, I always had a transistor radio with me because you could flick between the 3 stations in Victor, London, and whatever the other one was. So if you didn't like the record on one station, you could flick to the other one. And I'd use it in break times, you know, because it was all going off, 65, 66. You had to keep your ear glued to a radio or you lost out. And I always kept that habit since that time. And so I always had a transistor radio, you know, like a cheap thing with a speaker in it. And at the 100 Club, in one of our kind of more absurd decisions, we decided that proper groups didn't speak to the audience. Like, it was really punk if you didn't say thank you or and here's one off our latest album or anything like that. So we decided, right, we're not going to speak to the audience, we're just going to play, right? Punk, right. Anyway, that was good, as long as you could keep bashing the numbers out. But then Keith Levene broke a string. And there was that horrible gap. They are standing in a club with like 300 or 400 lunatics, like all lathered up and foaming at the mouth. And you can't just stand there looking at them. It would become ridiculous. And so I'd thrown my transistor radio that I always carry with me on top of this piano. And so quickly I grabbed it and I just turned it on and held it up to the mic. And it just so happened there was a very heavy either news bulletin or panel discussion about Northern Ireland and the bombs. Because like, it has to be remembered that bombs were going off in London all the time. In fact, it didn't seem like Christmas if there wasn't bombs in a ludicrous way. And Dave Goodman was one of the early recorders of the Sex Pistols, and he had the sus to put a really hip dub echo onto the mic. So I held up the transistor radio, and it was like, and here we are talking about the bomb that just went off at Piccadilly, and he put on a dub echo, so it went like, boom, 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 Piccadilly, dilly, dilly, dilly. And it just filled that gap so well that forever after it's become like a folk tale. People think it was a setup, but there was no setup, and I had the radio, and there happened to be a thing on it, and Dave Goodman at the desk put on the dub echo, and that became one of the folk tales of the night. Was it a setup or wasn't it? But no, it wasn't. It was a bit of luck, yeah. But after that, we abandoned that stance and started to speak to the audience. As soon as I saw the Sex Pistols in the Nashville room, they were supporting the one-on-oneers, and like, we were kind of we had an attitude, you know, like we were squatters and we didn't care a damn about anything or anybody. And then these lot came in, and I remember thinking, God damn it, look at these guys. And Sid Vicious was the last one in the queue as they came through the dressing room. They were doing their sound check. And I thought, I'm going to mess with one of these blokes to see what they're made of. And he was wearing an Elvis Presley gold jacket. And I said to Sid, because he was the last one in the queue, there came like Johnny Rotten and Malcolm and a few camp followers and some, you know, strange looking. We were just kind of like filthy hippies, really. And they were like art weirdos. It was a different look, yeah? And Sid was the last one, and as he passed me, I went, "Oi!" And he went, "What?" I said, "Where'd you get that jacket?" And I love Sid for this, because groups were like that in those days, like you faced each other off, or, you know, it was like dog eat dog, you know, there wasn't no quarter asked or given. And Sid could have gone like, "Piss off, you turd," or something like that. But he went, "Oh, it's really good, isn't it? I'll tell you where I got it. You know that down the market there, the third stall from the left? Well, I got it there." And like, I think how great Sid didn't need to put an attitude on. But anyway, they played, and I just went out, and the audience, there was hardly anybody there. It was sort of Tuesday night or something. And I went, God, I knew we were finished. I know in America people think it's ridiculous that one can fight to the death over articles of clothing, but in these islands, it's a different story, and the reason the punks and the Teds went to war, and if I can try and describe the differences, Teddy boys were rock and rollers, so called from an Edwardian style of dress. And punks came in and took these suits that Teddy boys had made, which were like lovely, very long jackets, fingertip length, and moleskin collars and all this. And punks took them and tore them up and put safety pins through them. Johnny Rotten was particularly good at decorating a jacket, and Teddy boys didn't like punks because they were the new things on the block, and they thought we were disrespecting their kit, which I suppose we were. But that set the Teddy boys and punks into a war, and for one summer there in '76, it was fairly dangerous to walk on the streets of London. I mean, you'd get involved pretty much every day with a Teddy boy, and especially on the Saturday battles on the King's Road. But that was the last gasp of the Teddy boys, really. That was their last, like a Custer's last stand in a way. They got blown away by the whole thing because they were of the old and punk was of the new, and there was going to be no contest in the end for that.